The morning that followed Evelyn Harcourt's forced wedding felt nothing like the life she had once imagined for herself. Gone were the sunlit parlors of her childhood, the polished silver, the careful laughter of soirees where her mother used to whisper instructions about grace and posture. In their place stood a modest carriage rolling over uneven country roads, carrying her toward a future she had not chosen and a husband she barely knew. Evelyn sat upright, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as if good posture could anchor her to the fragments of dignity she had left. Outside, the landscape slipped by in muted greens and grays, the sky swollen with the threat of rain. Everything looked unfamiliar, stripped of the elegance she once took for granted. Even the air felt different, colder, heavier, indifferent to her presence. Her new husband, Gabriel, sat across from her, silent as stone. His posture was relaxed, almost too controlled, as though he were accustomed to hiding emotions rather than expressing them. His clothes were plain, the coarse wool of his coat slightly worn at the edges, and yet nothing about him matched the life of a humble man. He carried himself with the unsettling quietness of someone raised to command rather than obey. Every movement, lifting his gloves, adjusting his collar, even glancing out the window seemed deliberate. Evelyn tried not to look at him, but failed. There was something unreadable in his eyes, something that didn't belong to a stranger of no fortune or name. The priest had described him as modest. Her aunt had called him a practical solution, but Evelyn, trapped in the suffocating stillness of that carriage, sensed a deeper mystery beneath his calm facade. As the road climbed toward the remote estate where she was now meant to live, Evelyn wondered whether fear or curiosity weighed heavier on her chest. She had lost her future, her home, and her certainty. But seated before her was a man who seemed to have surrendered his own past. Two strangers, tied by necessity. Two lives about to collide with a truth neither of them saw coming. And Evelyn, trying to stop her hands from trembling, could not shake one single thought. Who exactly had she married? Eleanor Harrington had always been taught that a noblewoman's life unfolded like the steps of a well-choreographed dance, predictable, polite, and inevitably guided by the hands of others. Yet the evening her father informed her she was to be married off to a man she had never met, a humble stranger of no title, no influence, and no apparent lineage. Something inside her fractured quietly, like a porcelain cup cracking under invisible pressure. Her family's estate, once grand, had fallen into desperate decline. Debts had hollowed out its golden halls, merchants whispered of unpaid accounts, and her father, Lord Harrington, once esteemed in court, had become a shadow of the man he once was. The arrangement, she was told, was necessary. A wealthy patron offered financial salvation in exchange for her hand to a young man under his guardianship, a commoner, a nobody. Eleanor felt humiliation coil in her throat, but she obeyed as obedience was expected from women of her rank. On the morning of the wedding, silence clung to the manor like fog. Her dress, though elegant, felt heavy on her shoulders, as if weighted by the future she could not escape. Outside, the carriage waited, a simple vehicle that contrasted violently with everything she had been raised to expect. When she arrived at the small chapel, she saw him for the first time, Nathaniel. He stood tall, his posture composed but unassuming, with dark hair slightly unruly, as though he did not yet know the power it gave him. His eyes, though unsettled, her most steady, observant, almost too calm for a man of his alleged social standing. Something in them hinted at secrets, or perhaps at a life much broader than the modest background she had been told he came from. The ceremony was brief. She spoke her vows mechanically. He spoke his with a low, measured voice that carried neither triumph nor desperation. There was something restrained in him, something almost noble in its self-control, and that contradiction gnawed at her. A poor man with the bearing of someone who had commanded rooms far larger than this chapel. Impossible, so she told herself. Afterward, the carriage took them to the estate that was now hers by marriage. Or so she thought. The house, if it could even be called that, was secluded, hidden deep between ancient oaks and strangely immaculate for a residence belonging to someone of modest birth. The interior was furnished with understated elegance, the sort that suggested old wealth carefully concealed. She questioned it immediately. Nathaniel offered few explanations. He did not touch her, nor impose any expectations. He simply told her she was free to explore the manor, free to ask questions, free to rest. Yet his politeness only made her more suspicious. Why marry her at all? Why agree to a union with a noblewoman whose family had fallen from grace? That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor roamed the corridors. She discovered doors locked without reason, hallways that seemed more expansive than the facade suggested, and portraits that had been removed, their outlines still visible on the walls. She felt watched, though she knew it was impossible. Or so she thought. In the early hours of dawn, she overheard Nathaniel in a low conversation with an unseen man near the stables. His tone no longer humble, sharp, confident, commanding. The words she caught chilled her blood. No one must know yet. Not until the time is right. When she tried to confront him at breakfast, he offered a disarming smile and diverted the subject with practiced ease. Later that afternoon, a sealed letter arrived for him, bearing an emblem she recognized but could not immediately place an insignia. She had seen only once during a royal parade. The crest of Aldmore, the ancient duchy long feared and respected throughout the kingdom. What business could a supposed commoner have with such a crest? Nathaniel tucked the letter away before she could ask. But his composure slipped if only for a second, and she saw something unmistakable. Fear. Fear of her questions, fear of discovery, fear of what would happen once the truth surfaced. Over the next days, Eleanor watched him more closely. His gait, his diction, the studied neutrality of his expressions, none belonged to a man of low birth. Even the servants, few as they were, treated him with a mixture of reverence and caution, as though he were far more than her father had told her. And slowly, the truth began stitching itself together in her mind like an emerging tapestry. Nathaniel was not who he appeared to be. He was hiding from something or someone. One evening, as a storm raged outside and thunder shook the windows, Eleanor found him in the library, one of the locked rooms that he had finally allowed her to enter. He stood before a large portrait draped in cloth. She approached quietly. "Why did you marry me?" she asked, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the weight of truths demanding to be spoken. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he pulled away the cloth, revealing the portrait beneath. Eleanor gasped. She recognized the man in the painting, the late Duke of Aldmore, one of the most powerful figures in the kingdom, known for his iron rule and vast fortune. Beside him stood a boy-sole heir to the duchy whose features bore an uncanny resemblance to the man now standing beside her. Nathaniel finally turned to her, and with a voice stripped of all pretense, he said, "Because the kingdom believes the heir to Aldmore died years ago, and for your own safety, you must not repeat what you now know." Her world blurred, her breath caught. The man she had been forced to marry was no humble stranger. He was the lost Duke of Aldmore, alive, hiding, and bound to her by a truth that could shatter the kingdom. Nathaniel's confession hung in the air like a blade suspended by an invisible thread, and Eleanor felt as though the walls around them shifted under the weight of truths too dangerous to fully comprehend. The storm outside battered the manor as relentlessly as her thoughts battered the fragile structure of her understanding, and she stood frozen, trying to reconcile the man she had married with the heir presumed dead by the entire kingdom. Nathaniel did not move. He watched her with a patience that felt unnatural, as though he had rehearsed this moment many times and feared it for even longer. She felt the instinct to flee rise within her chest, yet at the same time she found herself unable to turn away from him. "You should have never seen this portrait," he said quietly, and though the words were soft, they carried a warning sharpened by years of exile. "But you have, and now the consequences are no longer mine alone." Eleanor felt her breath unsteady as she stepped back, the realization dawning on her that she was now entangled in a conspiracy, far larger than the convenient marriage her father had described. "Why hide?" she whispered. "Why let the kingdom believe you're dead?" Nathaniel's jaw tensed, the faintest tremor betraying emotions he had kept buried beneath layers of composure. "Because if they knew I lived, Eleanor, I would not have survived long enough to reclaim anything. My father's death was not an accident. And had I remained in the open, mine would have followed within days." His words echoed through the library. swallowed only by the crackling of the fire and the thunder rolling across the sky. Eleanor felt cold despite the flames, her mind piecing together fragments of rumors she had heard in passing whispers of political rivalries, of noble families hungry for power, of a duchy whose wealth alone could destabilize the entire court. Nathaniel moved past her and closed the door, the click of the lock sounding like a verdict. "You are not in danger from me," he said, "but from those who killed my father. They believe the ducal line ended with him. If they learn you are my wife, you would become a target too." She swallowed hard, feeling the room tighten around her. "Then why marry me at all? Why involve me in this?" Nathaniel exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to the window where lightning illuminated the world beyond. "Because I needed protection that only a noble union could provide. Your father was desperate, and desperation makes men agreeable, but I never meant to put you in harm's way. I believed anonymity would shield us both." Eleanor felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat, though she suppressed it. "You believed wrong," she said. "You dragged me into a life built on lies?" Nathaniel met her gaze then, and she saw something raw flicker in his eyes, regret, certainly, but also something else. Resolve. "I did," he admitted. "But I will not let anything happen to you." His words, though earnest, did little to calm the storm inside her. She stepped away, her mind unraveling with every revelation, each detail forming a puzzle she had never asked to solve. Yet the more she tried to distance herself, the more the truth drew her back in. "If you truly are the Duke," she said, steadying her voice, "why return now? Why reveal anything at all?" Nathaniel's shoulders tensed. "Because the man who murdered my father has grown bold. Too bold, rumors reach even the shadows. He seeks to claim not only Aldmore but the crown itself. And if I remain hidden, if I do nothing, he will succeed." The words hit her like ice water. Treason, regicide. These were accusations whispered only in the darkest corners of the kingdom, not spoken aloud in the dead of night by a man who should have been nothing more than her husband in a modest estate. "Who is he?" she asked. Nathaniel hesitated. That alone frightened her more than any answer could have. "Lord Ashcombe," he finally said, his voice barely audible over the storm, a name she knew. A name everyone knew. A man celebrated for his influence, respected for his alliances, rumored to be ruthless but never openly accused of wrongdoing. A man with enough soldiers, coin, and political charm to manipulate an entire kingdom. Eleanor felt her stomach twist. "If what you say is true, then no one is safe." "Exactly," Nathaniel replied. "And that is why I cannot face him alone." She felt his gaze pierce through her uncertainty. "Your marriage to me protects you from alliances that would use you as a pawn. And it gives me legitimacy should I ever reclaim my name?" Eleanor crossed her arms, her pulse racing with a mixture of fear and reluctant understanding. "But I never agreed to any of this." "I know," he said. And for the first time since she had met him, his voice cracked. "And I am sorry." The sincerity in his tone disarmed her more than any deception could have. She sensed no manipulation, no calculated ploy, only a weary truth worn thin by the burden of survival. Nathaniel returned to the portrait and traced his fingers along the frame, as though reconnecting with a past he had been forced to abandon. "I was 15 when my father died," he said. "Old enough to understand danger, but too young to defend myself. Ashcombe ordered the attack that killed him. I escaped only because a loyal retainer smuggled me out before the assassins returned." Eleanor's throat tightened. Despite everything, she felt a flicker of pity. "And since then?" "I have lived among those who owe allegiance only to justice, not crowns," Nathaniel replied. "But justice is powerless without proof. And proof is exactly what Ashcombe has spent years erasing." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Eleanor felt trapped between two worlds, the predictable life she once knew and the perilous reality now forced upon her. Yet one truth slowly emerged from the chaos: if she walked away from this, Nathaniel would stand alone against an enemy too powerful to confront without allies, and if she stayed, she would be stepping into a war she did not choose. The thought terrified her. But something deeper tugged at her, a sense of duty, perhaps, or the faint stirring of courage she had never known she possessed. Nathaniel turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "You have every right to walk away," he said softly. "I will not force you into this, but if you choose to stand with me, I swear I will protect you with everything I am." Eleanor stared into his eyes and saw the truth he had fought so hard to hide, not the secret of his identity, but the desperation of a man carrying the weight of a fallen legacy. The storm outside began to subside, the thunder fading into distant echoes. Nathaniel's voice lowered. "What do you choose?" Eleanor's breath trembled as the answer rose unbidden from a place she could not name. She stepped toward him, her heart pounding like a drum beneath her ribs. And when she spoke, her words sealed a fate far greater than either of them could fully foresee. "I choose to learn the truth," she said. Nathaniel's eyes widened, a mixture of relief and fear swirling within them. And with that choice, Eleanor Harrington stepped into the shadows of Aldmore, into a destiny bound by danger, deception, and a duke she never intended to love. Eleanor barely slept that night. Even after the storm faded into the quiet hum of the night wind, her mind remained caught between fear and a strange, unsteady anticipation. Dawn had not yet broken when she rose from bed, compelled by a force she could neither name nor resist, and moved silently through the dim corridor that led to the lower floors of Aldmore Manor. She expected to find the house as abandoned as it felt, but faint light flickered beneath the library door. She hesitated only a moment before entering. Nathaniel was already awake. He stood at the large oak table, bent over a map weighted by iron seals, candlelight casting sharp lines across his face. There was a gravity in his posture she had not noticed before, an air of command concealed beneath years of obscurity. When he lifted his head and their eyes met, he seemed momentarily surprised, though not displeased. "You rise early," he said quietly. "I could not sleep," she replied, and the truth of it echoed in the stillness around them. Nathaniel gestured for her to join him. As she approached, her gaze drifted across documents strewn across the table-coated letters, fragments of ledgers, and a seal she recognized instantly, the crest of Aldmore, the same one that had hung in the portrait upstairs. "These are the pieces of the truth you asked for," Nathaniel said. "But truth is rarely gentle, Eleanor. Are you certain you wish to know it?" She steadied her breath, aware that each step into this world removed her further from the innocence of ignorance. "I choose knowledge," she answered, "even if it frightens me." Nathaniel studied her with a depth that made her pulse quicken, as though he were measuring not her courage, but the resilience of her soul. Then, with a solemn nod, he began, "Before my father died, he uncovered a conspiracy hidden within the court. Ashcombe had been building a network of influence for years, bribing lesser nobles, threatening others, acquiring land piece by piece under false names. His ambition was nothing short of sovereign power. The crown was merely the final step." Eleanor felt her breath tighten. Treason was one thing, but the systematic reshaping of a kingdom quietly, invisibly, was something far darker. "Did the Duke try to stop him?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded. "He confronted Ashcombe in private. It was a mistake. 3 nights later, my father was dead. The official report claimed illness, but half the manor staff disappeared the same week. The man who rescued me overheard the assassins speaking. They mentioned Ashcombe by name." Eleanor felt a chill rush down her spine. "And you've been hiding ever since." "Not hiding," Nathaniel corrected. "Preparing, gathering allies, collecting proof, waiting for a moment when exposing him would not end in both my death and the kingdom's downfall." His voice hardened, though his eyes betrayed the burden of years spent in survival's shadow. "And that moment may be approaching sooner than expected," Eleanor frowned. "Why?" Nathaniel slid a sealed document across the table. She broke the wax and unfolded it, her breath caught. It was a royal proclamation drafted but not yet issued, naming Lord Ashcombe as interim regent due to the king's sudden illness. "The king is dying," Nathaniel said. "Ashcombe has positioned himself to take control the moment the throne is vulnerable." Eleanor felt the edges of the paper tremble in her hands. "If he seizes power, he will come after you the moment he learns you live." "Exactly," Nathaniel answered. "Which is why I must act now, and why your presence here complicates everything." She stared at him, trying to decipher whether the hint of worry in his voice was for himself or for her. Before she could ask, footsteps echoed in the corridor. Eleanor froze, but Nathaniel reacted instantly. He extinguished the candles, swept the documents into a hidden compartment beneath the table, and motioned for her to stay silent. The door creaked open. A man stepped inside, broad-shouldered, rough-faced, dressed in a battered cloak. His boots were muddy, and his manner carried the unrefined directness of someone who belonged in battlefields rather than parlors. Eleanor instinctively stepped behind Nathaniel, but the stranger simply bowed his head. "You summoned me, my lord," he said. "The roads from the north are watched, but I made it through." Nathaniel's posture shifted. In an instant he no longer resembled the quiet, introspective man Eleanor had married. He stood taller, commanding, undeniably noble even without a title. "Report?" he said. The man nodded and lowered his voice. "Ashcombe has doubled the guard around the capital. He's expecting resistance. Rumor says he believes an heir still lives." Eleanor felt her heartbeat stop. Nathaniel's expression barely changed. "Does he know where to look?" "Not yet," the soldier answered, "but his men question anyone traveling from the Western Territories. They've searched 3 estates this week, claiming to investigate tax discrepancies. It's only a matter of time before they come here." Eleanor's breath rushed out in a whisper. "Here?" The soldier turned to her, startled, but Nathaniel stepped forward. "Lady Eleanor is my wife," he said firmly. "She knows the truth now." The man bowed to her with unexpected respect. "Then God help us all, my lady. You've married into a war." Eleanor felt the weight of that truth settle on her shoulders like cold armor. Nathaniel dismissed the soldier with instructions delivered in terse, urgent tones. When the man departed, silence filled the library once more. Nathaniel turned to her with an apology written into the lines of his face. "I wanted to spare you this," he said. "But the world rarely grants mercy." Eleanor drew in a steady breath, her resolve harder than she expected. "What must we do?" Nathaniel hesitated, as though weighing whether she was truly ready. "There is a ledger," he said at last. "One kept by Father Martin of Westhaven Abbey. He recorded every corrupt transaction Ashcombe orchestrated. If we obtain it, we will have proof strong enough to bring him down." "Then we must retrieve it," she replied. Nathaniel gave a faint, tired smile. "You are braver than you know." Eleanor stepped closer, the tension between them charged with unspoken truths. "I am not brave," she said softly. "I am simply no longer blind." Nathaniel's gaze held hers, and something warm flickered there, something dangerous in its own right. "We leave at dusk," he said. They spent the day preparing in silence, broken only by necessity. Eleanor packed garments suitable for travel, though her hands trembled with the enormity of what lay ahead. Nathaniel secured provisions, studied maps, and sent coded messages through discreet couriers. As the hours passed, she watched him, not the humble stranger she had married, but the man beneath the disguise, determined, intelligent, a leader forged by loss. And despite her fear, she felt her trust in him deepening. Just before dusk, as they stood at the entrance hall ready to depart, Nathaniel hesitated. "Eleanor," he began, "once we cross the threshold, there is no turning back. Ashcombe's men will be hunting us. The roads are perilous. The abbey is days away, and the ledger is heavily guarded." She met his gaze without wavering. "I made my choice last night. I stand by it." Nathaniel exhaled, a breath that sounded almost like relief. He offered his hand not as a command, but as an invitation. Eleanor placed her hand in his. The touch startled her. He was warm, solid, real, in a way that grounded her more than any promise could. They stepped into the twilight together, horses waiting at the gate. As they mounted and began the ride through the forested path beyond Aldmore's grounds, the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. Eleanor looked back once. Aldmore Manor stood silent, its windows glowing faintly as though watching them depart. Ahead lay danger, secrets, and a truth powerful enough to topple a kingdom. Beside her rode a man she barely knew, and yet somehow trusted more with each passing hour. And as the last light faded behind them, Eleanor realized something she had not understood until that moment. She had not simply chosen to learn the truth. She had chosen Nathaniel. Whether that choice would save her or destroy her was a mystery waiting in the shadows of the road ahead. The forest swallowed them almost instantly, the canopy stretching overhead like a vaulted ceiling of shifting leaves, filtering the last glimmers of twilight into fractured strands of gold and gray. Their horses moved quietly over the damp earth, hooves softened by moss and fallen branches. Eleanor felt the air grow cooler as they advanced deeper, the silence broken only by the distant hoot of an owl or the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. The path was narrow, winding, known only to locals and the occasional fugitive needing refuge. Nathaniel rode ahead, but often slowed his horse so that they were nearly side by side, his gaze flicking toward her with silent, protective vigilance. Eleanor sensed his tension even when he said nothing. It clung to him like a shadow, a weight he had carried too long. Yet he moved with certainty, as though every tree and every bend in the road were trusted companions. She admired him for that, admired his resilience, his secrecy, and the strange nobility that no disguise could conceal. They rode for nearly an hour before Nathaniel finally spoke. "We will camp near the riverbank tonight," he said quietly. "If we press further, we risk crossing into patrol lines?" Eleanor nodded, though her heart clenched at the thought of Ashcombe's men lurking somewhere in the darkness beyond. "How far are they from us?" she asked. "Far enough," he replied after a brief pause, "but close enough that we must not grow careless." She swallowed her fear, letting determination rise in its place. She had chosen this path, and she would follow it to its end. Eventually they arrived at a clearing beside a narrow river that glimmered faintly under the rising moon. Nathaniel dismounted first and offered his hand to help her down. His touch was steady, grounding her even as her nerves fluttered. They worked together in silence, securing the horses, gathering dry branches, and assembling a small camp that would be hidden from distant eyes. When Nathaniel lit the fire, its soft glow illuminated the sharp angles of his face. The exhaustion etched into it, and something else, something vulnerable beneath the armor he wore around his heart. Eleanor sat across from him, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You have traveled this road before," she observed. Nathaniel nodded. "Too many times. It is one of the few routes Ashcombe's men avoid. Superstition keeps them away." He tossed a small branch into the flames. "They say spirits wander this forest." Eleanor arched a brow. "Do you believe that?" "I believe men are far more dangerous than spirits," he replied, and she felt a faint chill at the conviction in his tone. The fire crackled softly between them as the forest settled into its nocturnal rhythm. After a moment, Eleanor leaned forward. "Nathaniel, may I ask you something?" His gaze lifted to hers. "You may ask anything. When you married me, did you know that this journey would become inevitable?" Nathaniel hesitated, as though struggling to decide how much truth to reveal. Finally, he spoke with quiet honesty. "I suspected it. Marrying you made me visible again. It drew attention I had avoided for years. But I did not foresee how quickly Ashcombe would move, or how far he would go to secure the crown." Eleanor's breath caught. "So I endangered you?" "No," Nathaniel said firmly, leaning forward so the firelight touched the warmth in his eyes. "You reminded me that hiding is not the same as living." I had forgotten that. Her chest tightened with emotion she could not quite name. She wanted to ask more, wanted to understand the man behind the mask, but before she could speak, a sudden crack of branches snapped through the darkness. Nathaniel moved instantly. He was on his feet, hand on the hilt of the dagger at his belt, his eyes scanning the shadows with lethal focus. Eleanor felt her pulse race as she rose slowly, her gaze darting between the trees. The noise came again closer this time. Nathaniel gestured for her to stay behind him. "Who goes there?" He called out, voice low but commanding. Silence. Then a figure emerged from the darkness, stumbling slightly, clutching something against his chest. Eleanor gasped. It was a boy no more than 12, drenched from the river, trembling from cold and exhaustion. Nathaniel stepped toward him cautiously. "What happened to you?" The boy tried to speak but collapsed to his knees, breath ragged. Nathaniel knelt beside him and helped lift him closer to the fire. Eleanor quickly removed her shawl and wrapped it around the boy's shivering shoulders. He flinched at first, then leaned toward the warmth, lips blue from cold. "They're coming," he whispered hoarsely. Nathaniel stiffened. "Who?" The boy's eyes widened with terror. "Soldiers, men with the Ashcombe crest? He coughed violently, struggling for breath. "They burned the mill. They said the Duke had been seen nearby. They asked for you by name?" Eleanor felt ice flood her veins as Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "How far are they?" Nathaniel demanded. "An hour, maybe less," the boy managed. "They're searching the forest." Nathaniel rose swiftly, all softness gone from his expression. "We leave now." Eleanor stood as he moved to extinguish the fire, scattering the embers with purposeful efficiency. "But the boy, he comes with us," Nathaniel said sharply. "If we leave him, he will not survive the night." He lifted the boy effortlessly onto one of the horses, securing him with a blanket and a rope to keep him from falling. Eleanor mounted next, trying to steady her shaking hands. Nathaniel took the lead, urging his horse forward into the darkness. The forest seemed to constrict around them, branches clawing at their sides as they rode deeper into uncharted paths. The boy clung weakly to the saddle, whispering directions between labored breaths. "There's a cave ahead, near the ridge. My father used it during storms. We can hide there." Nathaniel adjusted their course without hesitation. Eleanor's heart pounded with every hoofbeat, every creak of the saddle, every rustle in the trees that could have been wind or soldiers. They reached the ridge just as distant torches began to flicker through the woods behind them. Nathaniel dismounted, lifted the boy, and guided them toward a narrow rock opening partially concealed by thick foliage. "Inside," he whispered urgently. Eleanor ducked into the cave first, the boy close behind her, and Nathaniel entered last before pulling branches across the entrance to obscure it. They stood in near total darkness, breaths shallow, hearts thundering in unison. Outside, voices echoed harsh, commanding, unmistakably close. Eleanor felt her pulse in her throat. The soldiers moved through the clearing they had abandoned minutes earlier. She could hear the snap of branches, the hiss of torches, the deep growl of men searching for prey. "Spread out," one voice barked. "He's here, the Duke is here." "Find him." Nathaniel's hand found hers in the darkness, not out of fear, but solidarity, a silent promise that he would not let harm reach her. Eleanor clung to him, drawing strength from his steady presence even as dread clawed at the edges of her mind. Minutes passed like hours. The soldiers lingered, searched, cursed it into the night. Eventually their voices faded, swallowed by the forest's endless silence. Only then did Nathaniel allow himself to breathe. "We cannot stay here long," he whispered, "but for now, we are safe." Eleanor squeezed his hand gently, her fear slowly giving way to something deeper: loyalty, devotion, an unspoken vow forming in the darkness between them. The boy slept fitfully near the cave wall, still wrapped in her shawl. Nathaniel turned toward her, his voice low and earnest. "This journey has become more dangerous than I intended," he murmured. "If you choose to return to Aldmore, I will send you with an escort. You need not follow me further." Eleanor shook her head, the decision bold and unwavering. "I will not abandon you," she whispered. "Not now." "Not ever," Nathaniel's breath caught, just for a moment, as though her words cracked something inside him, something fragile and fiercely guarded. "And then we face the storm together," he said softly. As dawn began to seep into the sky beyond the cave's entrance, they stood side by side, warriors bound not by title or duty, but by a truth neither could deny. The world was changing around them, collapsing into chaos and treachery, yet in the heart of that darkness they had found each other. And the path ahead, no matter how perilous, would be walked together. He did not know how long he stood there, drenched in the dim glow of morning and the weight of the confessions that seemed to leak from the very walls around him. But at last Rowan felt something inside him rearrange, as though an invisible hand had placed a final piece on a board he had never seen clearly until now, and with that realization came a quiet resolve so profound it nearly frightened him. He turned from the lake, its dark surface rippling with secrets, and walked back through the awakening forest, the branches whispering beyond him as if urging him onward. The estate rose in the distance like a slumbering giant, its windows still dark, its halls still holding the ghosts of decisions made in fear and half-truths. But Rowan knew, for the first time since the unraveling of his mother's last message began, exactly what he needed to do. Inside the manor, Eleanor sat in her study, the desk lamp casting a small circle of amber light across papers and letters she no longer had the strength to organize. She looked older than she had the night before, as though time had decided to settle its debts on her all at once, but when Rowan entered, something like reluctant relief flickered across her face. He did not sit, nor did he offer her the chance to speak first. He simply stood before her and laid the silver locket on the desk, its chain pooling like liquid moonlight. "No more shadows," he said quietly, and though his voice did not rise, the room seemed to stiffen around it. "No more pieces of truth delivered only when everything is already beyond repair." Eleanor closed her eyes. Her breath trembled as she opened the locket with careful fingers, revealing the worn photograph tucked inside his mother, younger, smiling in a way Rowan had never seen, standing beside a man whose face carried a familiar sharpness around the eyes. Eleanor's voice, when it came, was brittle. "She thought it would protect you. She thought that by keeping him hidden, by keeping everything hidden, you would never inherit the consequences of the choices we made." Her gaze lifted to him, filled with a grief that had nowhere left to hide. "I thought that too." Rowan let the truth settle between them, its weight simultaneously heavy and yet strangely liberating. "His name," Rowan said. "I want his name." Eleanor hesitated, the pause stretching long enough that Rowan wondered if she would refuse him even now, but at last she whispered, "Alistair Hathaway." The name struck him not as a revelation, but as a final stitch in a tapestry that had already taken shape. Rowan inhaled slowly. "And he is alive?" "Yes," Eleanor murmured. "Living far from here, by his own choice. Your mother tried to reach him once, but he sent her away, and when she told me, we agreed." Her voice broke, and she pressed her hand to her lips. "That you deserved more than his absence." Rowan felt the old anger rise again, not the pulsing heat of betrayal, but a sorrowful fury that felt almost calmer in its intensity. "I deserved the truth," he said. "Even if it hurt," Eleanor nodded, tears tracing down her cheeks. "I know, and I am sorry," but apologies, Rowan realized, were not the currency he sought. What he needed, what he had needed since the beginning, was clarity, direction, a sense that he was not merely wandering through legacies imposed upon him. And as he stood there, his decision crystallized. "I'm leaving," he said. Eleanor's eyes widened. "Where will you go?" "To find him. Not because I expect answers or reconciliation or even acknowledgement, but because I need to close a door that has been open my entire life without my knowing." Eleanor rose, her hands trembling as she reached toward him before letting them fall to her sides. "Rowan, you may not find what you seek. He may reject you. He may deny everything," Rowan nodded. "That's his choice. But meeting him, facing him, that's mine." They stood in silence, not as mother and son, but as two people finally acknowledging the enormous cost of secrets kept in the name of love. At last, Eleanor stepped forward, resting her hand gently on his cheek. "Your mother," she whispered, "would be proud of the man you've become." The words carved something open in him, something both tender and aching, and he allowed himself to close his eyes, just for a moment, and breathe in the truth of them. When he opened them again, he felt steadier. He packed lightly, just enough to carry him through the uncertain miles ahead, and left the estate not with bitterness, but with a sense of reclamation, as though he were walking not away from a life, but toward his own. The air was cool, the wind carrying hints of winter, and as he descended the long gravel road, he felt an almost imperceptible lightness, the kind that comes from knowing the path ahead belongs wholly to oneself. The journey to the coastal town where Alistair Hathaway was said to live took days, each hour giving Rowan space to unravel the knots of his own emotions. At times he felt hopeful, at others afraid. But beneath it all was a quiet determination, the kind that no fear could sway. When he finally arrived, the sun was setting behind the cliffs, staining the sky with deep shades of gold and crimson. The small cottage stood at the edge of the shoreline, its windows glowing faintly. Rowan approached slowly. His pulse was steady, not with calm, but with purpose. He knocked. A pause, footsteps, the door opened. The man who stood before him had the same sharpness around the eyes, the same quiet intensity Rowan had seen in the photograph. For a moment neither spoke. Then Rowan, with a courage born from everything he had endured, said, "My name is Rowan Hale." A flicker passed through the man's gaze, recognition, disbelief, maybe even regret. Rowan continued, his voice firm yet gentle. "I didn't come for forgiveness or explanations. I came because I needed to see for myself the man who shaped half of who I am." Alistair breathed in sharply, as though the words struck deeper than Rowan intended. "Your mother—" he began, but Rowan lifted a hand, not in rejection but in acknowledgement. "I know," Rowan said softly. "I know enough." Another silence. This one different. Heavier, yet not suffocating. Then, unexpectedly, Alistair stepped aside. "Would you like to come in?" Rowan nodded. Not as a son seeking approval, nor as a stranger demanding answers, but as something simpler, perhaps even stronger, a young man choosing not to inherit silence. And as he crossed the threshold, he felt the final remnants of his old life settle behind him, not discarded but transformed. In the quiet light of that small coastal home, Rowan understood that some stories do not end with revelations or reconciliations, but with the courage to face truth, claim identity, and walk forward unafraid. His story, unlike the ones he had been given, would be his to write. And at last he was ready.